Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. I'm Tyler, and today we are going to talk about the Orioles taking 2 out of 3 from the Kansas City Royals in walk-off fashion. But first, let's talk about the report from Forbes on baseball finances. It found that the Orioles had the highest operating profits in 2023 of the 30 MLB clubs. Their profit was $99 million just last season, and over the last 3 seasons combined, they've made $247 million in operating profits for a margin of about 30%, which both of those numbers are also the highest in MLB. Now, the number operating profit is probably a little bit of a confusing one. They talk about it as before taxes and amortization and interest and all that stuff. So it's not a perfect number, but it is interesting that the Orioles, who are an organization, at least from the perspective of John Angelos, has kind of cried poor for the last few years, have been making a lot of money. You know, we know John Angelos promised at spring training last year to open up the books and let the reporters see how the Orioles are doing, and that would give them the evidence as to why the Orioles aren't spending a ton, because that's been a complaint of the fan base the last few years is, okay, the team is clearly on the upswing here, which is great. And we saw them win 101 wins last year. Let's start investing in that talent. Let's give out extensions. Let's go sign some free agents to bigger long-term deals to make sure that, yes, the Orioles win games, but they also win playoff games. They get to World Series. Like, ultimately, that's what we care about. Is it's great to win games. You want to win in the playoffs, which, as great as Mike Elias has been at all this stuff, the Orioles still have not won a playoff game with him in charge. That needs to change this year, and it needs to change in a big way. But back to this Forbes report, John Angelos has talked about how the Orioles don't have that much money. If we sign these guys to long-term deals, to big deals, we're gonna have to increase ticket prices. We're gonna have to increase concession prices. We're gonna have to increase jersey prices. Whatever the Orioles have control over, they're gonna need to increase the prices on those things in order to pay for these bigger contracts, which I think some fans would say, okay, it's an entertainment product. I understand you need to pay more for a better product. I'm okay paying another $2 for a bleacher ticket if that means that Gunnar Henderson is an Oriole for the next 10 seasons. That's probably one angle of it. But the other angle is just a straight up lie. You don't need to increase ticket prices all crazy amounts or whatever, because you've already got the money there. Now it's further evidence that, the Angelos family also operates their baseball team a little bit differently, or did, because they are now the former owners of the Orioles. They operated their baseball team a little bit differently than a lot of other teams do. Obviously, these guys are all very rich people that want to make money on anything that they invest in. However, it does feel like a lot of these owners view their sports teams, whether it be baseball, football, whatever, as sort of a secondary or a tertiary source of income that is more of like a toy, like a plaything that they can show off to their other, rich, fancy friends at their yacht clubs or their golf clubs or whatever, and say, oh, like, yeah, I also own the Baltimore Orioles. And isn't that funny that I do that thing that, in the grand scheme doesn't even make me that much money. You look at some of these teams, they're making $10 million a year, or they're actually losing money on it. Of course, they're probably not in reality losing money, because you can then deduct it and all that stuff. I don't know enough to get into that level of it, but you understand what I'm saying here. There's always financial gymnastics that these guys can do in order to actually make a profit on their investments. But the Angelos family, or at least specifically John Angelos, because I think Peter, you can kind of keep out of this because it's been exclusive to these last few years, which, we can talk about some of the good stuff that's happened as well. But I think John Angelos has viewed the Orioles as a way to make money, because he doesn't necessarily do other things that have a skill set required of them, or provide value, or anything like that. So he views the Orioles as his job, as his way to make money. And he's, in that way, done a great job these last 3 years. He's made the most operating income of any team in Major League Baseball. Um, but there's no real happy ending here, of course. The Angeloses are now gone, and, we'll feel the effects of that for a long time. I think in a lot of positive ways. The Angelos family is leaving the Orioles in a good spot. They have a very strong farm system. They have put in place a very smart front office, and that is a John Angelos decision there. And, I think Lewis was involved in that as well. But if you want to give John some props, it's that he got some very smart people involved that know what they're doing in terms of talent evaluation and talent development. And we're seeing the fruits of that on the field now. Now, there is like the other side of that, which is he also saw an ability to get better talent for cheaper, which I think the Orioles have been quite good at recently as well. And they also understand that the players, when they're younger, are cheaper, and you're getting the best value out of them. So there is, sort of that double-edged thing there going on. The Angeloses are now gone, and it's going to be up to David Rubenstein and his entourage to kind of take this team from where they are, which is a very good baseball team with a lot of young, controlled, cost controlled, inexpensive talent relatively, and get them to the next level, which is a team that should, for at least the next handful of years, be vying for World Series titles. It's not going to happen every year. You're not even going to get to the World Series every year. I think there's the fan base understands that, but the team should be winning playoff series. They should be going deep into the playoffs. They have the money, they have the assets, they have the talent to do it. And now it's up to Rubenstein to do it because we know the Orioles, as currently set up, are making plenty of money. Now it's time to double down on that. You'll make even more money, maybe not as much profit, but more revenue. You should. If the team is winning games, you're selling jerseys, even the terrible Fanatics ones, and you're getting more butts and seats, you're selling more concessions, etc. So that's kind of the latest on that. It's just sort of a ruse from the perspective of Angelos for the last few years, which I don't think that anybody is terribly surprised by. I think we understood that he was a little bit of a charlatan and it was time for him to go, but just sort of more reinforcement of that. And he's, it's fortunate for him, I guess, that he is out of the picture before this latest report comes in. Although I will say, we saw last year the Orioles were making plenty of profit. I think last year, or I'm sorry, in 2022, because it came out last year, that they made like $60 million in operating profit. So this isn't necessarily brand new news. We knew the Orioles were making plenty of money. Just sort of further confirmation of it, and they kind of did even more so last year when the team was finally good. All right, on to the games. In game one, the Orioles go down 3-0 in the third inning when starter Dean Kremer serves up a pair of home runs from Bobby Witt Jr. and Salvador Perez. The two guys in the Kansas City order you probably don't want to let hurt you, but it does happen here. They are professionals after all. The Orioles claw back in the fourth inning. Adley Rutschman leads off with a double, comes in to score on an Anthony Santander single. Then Ryan Mountcastle ties things up at 3 with a long 2-run bomb that finally conquers the wall in left field, Mountcastle's arch nemesis. Fast forward to the 8th inning, Yennier Cano, who had come in to finish the 7th, remains in for the 8th, and that's when he got himself into a little bit of trouble, serving up a pair of singles and an intentional walk sandwiched around a ground out to load the bases with 1 out. Then he induced a shallow pop out to Hunter Renfroe and then gets out of the jam with a strikeout of Nick Lofton. On to the O's half of the 8th inning, where they would actually manufacture the go-ahead run with 1 out. Gunnar Henderson and Rutschman reach on a pair of singles. Then after Henderson advances to third base on a Santander lineout, Mountcastle strodes to the plate, and he hits a sharp grounder between short and third. Bobby Witt Jr. ranges over to field the ball, throws a laser over to first base to Nick Lofton, but the ball bounces. Lofton is unable to scoop it, and Henderson scores. Then Craig Kimbrell comes on for his Orioles debut and a shot at his first save of the season. After striking out the leadoff hitter, Kimbrell allows a bloop single into left field. Pinch runner Darren Blanco comes on and then steals second and then steals third on Kimbrell, who just refuses to hold people on, apparently. And then he is able to score on a Michael Garcia sacrifice fly to knot the game back up at 4 runs apiece. And Kimbrell gets his first blown save of the season. Maybe it's his only blown save of the season. Hopefully that's the case, but I have a feeling it will not be. Now, fortunately, the O's bats were ready to answer back in the bottom half of the inning. Cedric Mullins singled to bring up Jordan Westberg. The infielder went right down 0-2, but then inexplicably, a fastball is thrown to him right down the middle of the plate, and he drives it to deep right field. It goes out just to the left of the out-of-town scoreboard on top of the groundskeeper shed in right field to get the walk-off win, 6-4, Orioles. Now, analysis of this game, Dean Kremer, I think, first of all, you start off with him. He did pretty well, all things considered. In the top of the first, I think both Henderson and Ramon Urias made an error. He fought back to not allow a run there. Then he does give up the pair of home runs in the third inning, which would end up being the only runs he allows in the game. Kramer's had an issue with home runs in the past, probably not quite as severe as Tyler Wells has, but Kremer does give up the long ball. We saw that, of course, in the playoffs last year. And something he needs to get under control, especially, in Camden Yards, which is not a place that gives up as many home runs as it used to. But all things considered, I think Kremer did, exactly what you expect him to do. He went, 5 innings, 3 runs, that's pretty solid day's work for, a back of the rotation arm. I think at full strength, he is the number 5 in this Orioles rotation, and he did a pretty good job there. Excuse me. The other pitcher you want to focus on, I think, is Kimbrell. he does blow the save here, but he does blow it in a very, not fluky way necessarily, but not in a way that's indicative of him really struggling. He got 2 strikeouts, including a strikeout of Bobby Witt Jr. The hit was a very weakly hit, and just Henderson couldn't quite get to it in between Henderson and Hayes in left field. I don't think that outing gives you any concern about Kimbrel. I think it's everything remains the same there. He's not Felix Bautista. The Orioles don't expect him to be Felix Bautista. He it was his first outing of the year. Velocity looked okay. This isn't the Craig Kimbrel that used to almost flirt with triple digits every time out there. He's not that guy anymore. So I think all things considered, Kimbrel looked pretty good there. And then the Orioles, you gotta commend the offense for fighting back there. I think, they scored 1 run in the final game of the Angels series. You maybe worry, is that gonna, be contagious, and you carry that in to the next game. They were struggling early on in the game against what's his name? I'll look it up here now that I brought him up for no real reason other than to forget his name, Michael Wacha. Wacha, who is a competent, solid pitcher. He's a pitcher I think the Orioles were in talks with earlier in the offseason before he signed with Kansas City. I know they were with him last year prior to signing Kyle Gibson. Wacha's a good, competent pitcher. The Orioles have seen him before. He pitched with the Rays for a little bit. They were struggling early on, but then they fought back. And then, of course, get the walk-off winner by Westberg at the bottom of the 9th inning. And prior to that, had gotten the go-ahead run, manufacturing it in the 8th inning. So I think all things considered, you feel pretty good about this. 6 runs from the offense. The bullpen did a nice job apart from Kimbrel's 1 run, which again was a little bit fluky. So I think all in all, a nice win from the Baltimore Orioles. Now on to game 2, where there's far less to really talk about because the Orioles just didn't do a whole lot. They managed just 3 hits, 2 of which came from Colton Cowser, who I think was kind of the story here. He had gotten his first start of the young season. He's somebody that Orioles fans were clamoring for on social media for a really long time. He's this top prospect who had a great spring, and he's being treated like a 4th outfielder, which, isn't necessarily surprising if you look at the complexion of the roster. He's not an obvious starter on this team with Hayes in left, Mullins in center, and Santander in right field. And then we know the Orioles like to keep the DH spot sort of rotating between O'Hearn, Mountcastle, Rutschman when he gets a day off, Santander. Like, the Orioles don't want to have an everyday DH, which I think, myself included, was assuming that Santander maybe wouldn't be the everyday DH, but would probably play about 50% of his games there. That hasn't been the case so far. They've liked Santander in right field, and when you do that, there's not really a spot for Cowser, at least not an obvious spot. So Cowser's largely been the 4th outfielder early on, but he got his first start here in game 2, and he made it count. He had 2 hits, and the 1 run was scored off of his RBI double in the 3rd inning, which he didn't hit the ball hard. I think it came off his bat at like 60 miles per hour. He kind of poked it down the third base line, just hit it where nobody was, and that's all you got to do sometimes. But apart from Cowser, it was a pretty rough day for the offense. The top 6 hitters in the lineup combined to go 0 for 21. And it's just tough to win a game like that against anybody. And it just didn't happen here. He only scored 1 run. It just wasn't going to happen for him. On the mound, Cole Irvin took his first turn in the rotation of the season. And the final line of it wasn't great. 5 innings, 7 hits, 4 runs, 2 walks, 3 strikeouts. But it was impressive to see him get through 5 innings after allowing 3 runs really early on. He kind of buckled down and gave the Orioles some innings, which is, that's kind of his role, I think, as the 5th man in this rotation is, Cole, we probably, back in, well, I don't even know when to say, but if you consider everybody's healthy, Means and Bradish, I think at this point, you're probably thinking Irvin goes to the bullpen before Tyler Wells does, although I know we've said on this podcast that Wells probably helps the bullpen more than Irvin does. And Irvin is the guy that can be your 5th starter that just gives you innings that maybe they're not great quality. Maybe they're like a 4.5 to a 5 ERA type thing, but he gives you the innings versus Tyler Wells can pitch out of the bullpen in crucial games that this bullpen is probably going to need him to pitch in and give you 1 or 2 really good innings out of the bullpen. Irvin's not really the guy to do that for you in the bullpen. So it's something there, but all things considered, I think Irvin did a fine job. He did exactly what you kind of expect out of a 5th man in the rotation. It just wasn't good enough on this day. And the bullpen was good in this game. Dylan Tate and Jacob Webb both threw a scoreless inning each. And then Jonathan Heasley made his Orioles debut and went 2 shutout innings against his former team, the Royals, including a pickoff of Bobby Witt Jr. at first base. So And it was interesting. Kevin Brown shared on the broadcast that Heasley had never even been to Baltimore before, had never been to Camden Yards, and the first time he ever stepped on the mound was when he came in to pitch in this game. I think he said Danny Coulomb had asked him, "Well, have you been out to the mound to feel it and try it out?" And Heasley's like, "I'll figure it out when I get there." And he looked pretty good. He's the guy that I think the Orioles are gonna need to depend on occasionally. He didn't make the team out of spring training, and I don't know that he's got an option left. Maybe he did because he already got sent down once, but he's a guy that I think is probably going to go back and forth, ride that Norfolk shuttle a little bit this year, but looked good in his debut. And then ultimately, the Orioles just lost that game 4-1 to even the series at one game apiece. Like I said, the bullpen was solid. The offense just did nothing, which that started to be a little concerning, especially as we get into the early part of game 3 here, where the Orioles scored 1 run in game 2 of this series. They scored 1 run in the final game of the Angels series. You start to worry, is this offense a little streaky? If Henderson's not hitting, does this whole lineup shut down? And we found out in game 3 well, we didn't really find that out in game 3 that it wasn't the case, because Henderson didn't really hit in game 3 either. Wasn't a good series for Gunnar Henderson in general, but the team does manage to win game 3, which we'll get into in just a second. But yeah, I think final thoughts from the game 2, good game for the bullpen. Irvin did fine. You're not going to love it. He's not a guy he hasn't earned his way to, not getting pushed to the bullpen or AAA even when Means is healthy or when Bradish is healthy, certainly. But I think for what you expect from a fifth man, he was fine. And in reality, he's more like the 7th best starting pitcher for the Orioles right now. So, all things considered, Cole Irvin was just fine. You need the offense to do more than score 1 run, regardless of who's on the mound. It's just 1 run's just very rarely going to get it done. Now, finally, game 3. This game was an epic before it even started. Fans and players alike had to sit through a 5-hour rain delay as a storm pelted the Baltimore area. And it's honestly shocking that this game got in at all, let alone all 9 innings were played, which the Orioles, spoiler alert, would need all innings to be played. The length of that delay was not due to just the poor weather, though. I think I saw some people on Twitter, especially, kind of up in arms, like, what's going on? Why are they not telling us anything? At this point, why not just cancel the game, reschedule it, yada, yada, yada. Due to the way schedules are done nowadays, I don't even know if it's nowadays, but the Royals aren't coming back to Camden Yards this year. Like, this is the one time they're in town. I haven't looked at their calendar. Maybe they come back to the area and play the Nationals a time, or maybe they're in Philadelphia a time, and it could make sense for them to sneak in a game here in Baltimore, but that's very difficult to do. You'd have to, arrange a hotel for a single night, a train ride, a plane ride. It complicates things a lot, and it also requires the Orioles and the Royals to have a common off day that coincides with the Royals being in the Northeast at some point. And that probably does exist somewhere in the season, but it is a hassle, and you'd rather not use an off day um, later in the season if you could avoid it. So it makes a lot of sense that they waited, and clearly they were right to do so. There was a window. Now, it did rain for durations of this game, but it was largely a mist in Baltimore, whereas it was raining and pouring most of the day up until that. So the game was originally supposed to be, I think, a 1 or 1:35 first pitch. Doesn't get underway for another 5 hours after that. And it was, what we did get, though, was a good pitching matchup. It was Corbin Burns versus Cole Reagans. And at least one half of that really came through with tremendous stuff. And unfortunately, it wasn't Corbin Burns, but we'll talk about that in just a second. So it turns out, though, like the Orioles, they thought the delay was for another 2 hours, I guess, on top of the 5 hours, because they did not come up and start hitting the ball until Cole Reagans was out of the game. So Raggins dominated for 6 1/3 innings, striking out 7, giving up almost exclusively weak contact when the ball was hit. There were a number of balls hit right back at Raggins. There was a couple that the catcher had to field. He was great. And Orioles manager Brandon Hyde said after the game that our guys just didn't do anything against Raggins. He's a great arm, and we just couldn't get to him. But luckily, he couldn't pitch 9 innings, and the bullpen had to come in at some point, and that's when the Orioles kind of took care of business. But meanwhile, the O's ace, Corbin Burns, was good. He was good. He just was not as sterling as he was on opening day, and he certainly wasn't as good as Reagans was on this day. He allowed 1 run in the first inning on a Salvador Perez single, and then another run in the third inning on another Salvador Perez single. Burns struck out 2 in the first inning, and then not another one until the final batter he faced, which was in the 6th inning. I think he ended up going 5 2/3, allowed those 2 runs, struck out 3. Not a fantastic game for Burns, but he got through it despite not having his absolute best dominant stuff, and that's still important as well. The Orioles finally got to scoring once Raggins. I keep saying Raggins, and I apologize. I know it's Reagans. It looks like Raggins, but it is Reagans. Once Reagans was out of the game, In the eighth inning, Cowser pinch hit for Jorge Mateo, and he reached on a not hard hit ball into center field, but it still got down for a single. And then he was able to get all the way around to third base on a James McCann double, which put him into position to score on a Gunnar Henderson sacrifice fly. James McCann, this is the James McCann game. I'm sure you already know that by now. The Orioles did manage to score once more in that inning when Adley Rutschman hit a ball into the right field corner, which Hunter Renfroe, he didn't look particularly athletic on it, but he was able to stop the ball from getting to the wall, kind of stopped on his right foot, pivoted, and chucked the ball into second base. I think most people understand Hunter Renfroe has a great arm, but he was going away from the play. It wasn't exactly on a line. He kind of threw a pop-up, but he got so much behind it. And Adley Rutschman, for all of his wonderful things, is not a particularly fast runner. Uh, Renfroe was able to get the ball into Witt. Witt made a nice snag and then tagged Rutschman to get him out, going for a double there. But the Orioles did manage to take care of business anyway in their half of the ninth inning with Kansas City closer Will Smith in the game. They quickly started to threaten. Mountcastle opened up the inning with a walk. Santander followed with a single, and then both of them moved up a base on a Jordan Westburg sacrifice bunt, which might be a little controversial. He had the walk-off a couple days ago, has been swinging a good bat early in the season, particularly in, high stake situations like that. So maybe he would have come through then. He's got ice in his veins, who knows? But he did his job there, put the sacrifice bunt down, and the Orioles got two players into scoring position. Smith, the lefty, then walked to the right-handed Austin Hayes to get to the left-on-left matchup against Cowser, who, remember, had pinch hit for Jorge Mateo earlier in the game, and the Orioles didn't have any right-handed options on the bench at that time. I think it was Tony Kemp and Ryan O'Hearn were the only unused options on the bench, so it was Cowser all the way there. And he unfortunately couldn't get it done. He had a really rough looking at bat where he didn't seem to be seeing the ball well. He was swinging at balls well out of the strike zone. He was looking at balls in the strike zone, just did not look comfortable there. So he struck out to get us to 2 outs with the bases loaded and James McCann stepping to the plate again. And this at bat went perfectly for McCann. He seemed like he was completely comfortable. He got up 2-0. Smith wasn't really terribly close to the zone with either pitch. And then he pretty much had to throw a hittable ball to McCann because you can't go down 3-0. Then you have to throw 3 straight strikes. That's not an ideal situation. So he gives him a fastball in the lower third of the zone, and McCann was all over it. He laced the ball into left field just beyond Witt at shortstop. Mountcastle scored easily to tie it, and then Cedric Mullins, who had pinch run for Santander, zipped around third base to go in and slide headfirst into home plate to get the 4th and final run of the game to give the Orioles a walk-off win for the second time in the series and give them the series win overall, 2-1 against the visiting Kansas City Royals. So analysis there, Burns wasn't fantastic, or he wasn't as fantastic as his opening day version was, but he still battled through 5 2/3. And that's kind of what an ace does, is when you're not great, you still put your team in a position to win. He didn't give up. He had tough circumstances with sitting through the 5-hour rain delay. And I'm sure his whole cadence and his rhythm and his methods were all off a little bit, but he didn't show it. He just didn't have the best absolute stuff to make the Royals swing and miss a whole bunch, but still got the job done there. Cole Reagans was fantastic. For whatever the 5-hour rain delay did to Burns, it didn't show any at all in Reagans. He looked great, throwing hard from the left side, keeping the Orioles off balance. He just looked fantastic. And although he didn't get the win here, the Royals have to be psyched about that, because that's an area that the Royals have really struggled with in recent years, is getting any sort of production out of their starting rotation. And Reagan seems like a guy that's going to do that for him for a long time. And then on the Orioles side, you face a really good pitcher in Reagans. It doesn't go great. He dominates you, but you get him to throw enough pitches that he's out of the game earlier in the game, and you can get to the bullpen, which isn't great. They ultimately they threw, I think, 2 2/3 innings, or maybe 2 1/3 innings, because Smith didn't get that final out. They allow 4 runs on 5 hits rather, 2 strikeouts, 2 walks. The bullpen's just not great for the Royals, and the Orioles took advantage of it. And that's what you do sometimes. You battle against the really good arms, and you feast on the inferior arms, and they did that perfectly. And James McCann in particular was great. Had a double and the RBI, and then the 2 RBIs to win the game at the end there. He was the majority of the Orioles offense in this game. So, the Royals aren't a fantastic team. The Orioles are going to face much better teams going forward, but they got the job done against an inferior opponent, and that's what you got to do. If you take 2 out of 3 in every series, you're going to win a lot of baseball games, and that's what the Orioles are doing early on here. So, and the other thing I wanted to touch on was the bullpen. This was a concern for the Orioles coming into the season, obviously without Felix Bautista, Dylan Tate coming off of a season where he missed all of 2023. A lot of the guys coming into this year that you're going to depend on are guys that I don't know if you'd call them 1-year wonders in terms of like Danny Coulombe, but not a guy with a huge track record of being great. Yennier Cano has one good season under his belt as a 30-year-old. The bullpen was a concern, and it didn't do great in the Angels series, but the bullpen was much better in this game. The only runs they allowed were that game one dink against Craig Kimbrell, where the runner then stole second and third and came home on a sac fly. That wasn't a particularly egregious situation there. You can understand and forgive Kimbrell there. And then Mike Baumann gave up a solo home run in Game 3, which that happens. It's going to happen to anybody. So, it wasn't like they dominated necessarily, but they went 3 games, allowed 2 runs, one of which was a little bit fluky. And I think you come out of the series feeling a little bit better about the Orioles bullpen. Dylan Tate looked much better than in his opening day appearance, where he was throwing far slower, didn't seem to know where the strike zone was. He looked a lot better. And I wasn't as scared with Craig Kimbrell on the mound as I thought I was going to be after I saw him throw a few pitches. Of course, he blew the save, but the stuff seemed fine. He got 2 strikeouts. So I think I come out of the series not totally eased of what the Orioles bullpen is capable of, but feeling at least a little bit better, and also confident that the Orioles are going to add to this bullpen at some point. I cannot think that Mike Elias is going to let this team, which should win a bunch of games, should win 90 plus games this year. He's not going to let them go into the postseason then with this current setup. So I feel okay about the Orioles bullpen right now, which is important. Let's give out 2 awards here. Most valuable player of the series. And this one's going to be a tie because there were 2 walk-offs, and I'm going to give each of the walk-off hitters an MVP here, which is Jordan Westburg and James McCann. Westburg gets bonus points for his sacrifice bunt in Game 3, which then set up the McCann single to drive in the winning runs in Game 3. So maybe you give Westburg the slight edge and say he's the MVP of the series because he kind of swallowed his pride there, got the bunt down, and put the Orioles in position to win. But I think all things considered, because McCann was just so important in the whole game in Game 3, they're just about even. So they get the MVP for me. And then as far as least valuable player, Ramon Urias is going to get it. Now, listen, I'm not a Ramon Urias hater. I like that he's on the team. I think he's got value as a guy that can play third and second, and even short in a pinch. And first, he's played first base before. I like Ramon Urias on the team, and I don't think he's like the lowest man on the roster, as some people are sort of making it seem, because he's had a rough start here. But he did go hitless again in this series, I think 0 for 6. He's gotten on base, I think, 1 time in the season so far, and he's playing a decent amount. And he also made an error in Game 1. And then it starts to be, okay, you're not playing the defense and you're not hitting. Then it starts to be some alarm bells going off, and we need to figure some stuff out, especially while Jackson Holliday, as well as the entire Norfolk Tides lineup, is crushing the ball in AAA. It becomes harder to see through all this stuff. But like I said, I would put Kemp lower on the pecking order than Ramon Urias. So I don't think this is like an indictment on him or that he needs to go tomorrow and we just keep Kemp and bring up Jackson Holliday. I still like Ramon Urias's flexibility more than Kemp, who is exclusively a second baseman, which is always kind of a weird thing. I mean, I guess he could play some corner outfield in a pinch, but I can't see him doing that a whole lot on this Orioles team. But I've been wrong before, and I'll be wrong again. But yeah, Ramon Urias, rough series for him. Hope he gets it going in the upcoming series in Pittsburgh. And that'll bring us to what's up next for the Orioles, which is 3 games in Pittsburgh. Friday, it's going to be Grayson Rodriguez. That's a 4:12 first pitch. I think that's because it's Pittsburgh's opening day there, so that's why it's kind of a weird start there. Saturday, Tyler Wells at 4:05, and then Sunday, Dean Kramer at 1:35. So no night games this weekend, all matinees, so make sure you're aware of that. And then all the games are going to be on MASN 2. And the weather looks playable in Pittsburgh throughout the weekend. Seems like Friday there's going to be some rain throughout the day, but it should clear up by the 4:12 proposed first pitch. So be aware of that. And then your quick scouting report on the Pirates. They're 5-1 as of this recording. They are going to play a game against the Nationals today, so they may be 5-2 or 6-1 by the time the Orioles get to town tomorrow. They swept 4 games from the Marlins to start the year, and they have so far split the first 2 games of the series with the Nationals. And their top players right now, Connor Joe, Michael A. Taylor, Brian Reynolds, and Key Brian Hayes all have OPSs over 850. But that said, the Orioles are still going to sweep them. So I can't wait for the Orioles to be 7-2. And that's when we'll have another episode, is a recap of that Pittsburgh series. So keep an eye out there. If you liked what you heard here, subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts. We're also on YouTube. You can give us a subscribe there. I think we're at 263 right now subscribers. I would love to get to 300 by May. You've all been amazing over there. And you can also go over there and comment and give us who your favorite moments of the series, who your MVP was. We'd love to hear it in the comments down below. So get involved there. And if you're just listening to us on audio, that's totally fine. If you can give us a rating and a review of 5 stars, that would be amazing. Helps us get to more Orioles fans. And I think on Spotify, you can write reviews really easily now. So give us a review over there on Spotify and help us grow a little bit and reach other Orioles fans. And then if you just want to talk to the guys on the side here, you can email us at thewarehousepod@gmail.com, or we're on Twitter and Threads @thewarehousepod. So those are all the ways you can get involved. I think we covered it all. Our Orioles are 4-2. They're in the rough and tough AL East against these Yankees who just won't quit. But I'm feeling good about the O's through 2 series. How do you feel? Let us know in the comments. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. And until next time, thanks for listening.